Okay. So thank you, Jirka. Jirka invited me to come and give the keynote here in XML Prague, where I haven't been for a few years. I suggested a few topics to him. I said I could talk about microdata and RDFA, as I've been working on the task force for that. Or I could talk about my work on legislation.gov.uk, which is an XML-based system for presenting legislation. And he said, yes, yes, all of that. And it was, that is kind of difficult. So I've had to go quite large scale in this presentation just to cover all of that. So what is the web? In the beginning, the web was really about hypertext, and shortly afterwards it was about hypermedia, putting pictures and text and content on a web in a way that was interlinked. And the individual pages that we use in the hypertext web is just HTML, very simple, not particularly well thought out document structure. And what was revolutionary about it was that it contained links. And that's what gave us the web to start with. And then, of course, people with SGML experience thought that the web could provide even more value if it wasn't limited to this single, not particularly meaningful language. And so the idea of having XML as the web started to take off. And that was I would say that there was a kind of hyperactive period in XML's childhood where it could do anything and everything. But this was the second kind of answer of what the web was, structured documents on the web. And that led to XML. And around the same time, then other people had the notion that the web was not just for providing documents, but for providing metadata about those documents and about other resources on the web. And then thinking about it, data about those, about things that exist outside the web and providing that data on the web. And that led to RDF and a whole other stack of technologies, having data about things like people and buildings and traffic. And meanwhile, computers got faster and we had more experience about what we wanted to do with the web rather than just receiving documents and reading documents. It was about interaction. And those highly interactive sites became applications. And this is our where we are at the moment, the application web. And for this, then we need concise, application-specific messages being passed between the server and the client, and stuff that is easy to use in JavaScript, which is the programming language of the web, and that means JSON. So we have these 4 languages, each one of them giving a different answer to what the web is, each arising from a different answer to that question. Now, each of these formats has some unique advantages. HTML has ubiquity. Every browser supports HTML natively, so you can just see the page when it's provided in HTML really easily. XML has a great flexibility in this nice, predictable parsing model. RDF has this kind of reach into the real world and to be able to talk about things in the real world in a way that's, that you can tie information together across different sites. And JSON is just darn practical. You can actually do stuff with it on the web. And that leads to the fact that we have these 4 different languages with these 4 different approaches leads to conflict and collisions between communities. One result of that is that we have a kind of ghettoization. So one community will say to another, that language, really, it's crap, it should not exist. There's no point in having that. I can do everything. This language can do everything. You're not needed. Another result for the more sensitive types is a kind of is a self-doubt. Why am I here? What am I for? Who should I be? We feel it, right? But each one of the formats has these advantages, and we kind of look at each other in a jealous way. And there's this kind of feeling, I want to be like you. Or often, you should be more like me. And so we get this pattern of forming, of trying to shove one language into being more like another language. So the argument will go, if we make RDF more like HTML, then people might use it. Or if you turn that crappy JSON into some XML that I can process, then I will use it. Yeah. So we get these relationships between these technologies, and that leads to some hybrids shown on this slide here, where we bring together two things like RDF and XML to create RDF XML, JSON and RDF to create JSON LD, and so on. Okay. So these are chimera. These are hybrid technologies. Now, how people judge technologies like these chimera really depends on their background and their experience, where they come from. So sometimes you can take a language that you really love and you can dress it up like something else. And the end result, you know, it looks a little bit stupid, but underneath it all, you can see that it's something, you know, it's something that you really like. Of course, the other way in which you can react to these chimera is, well, you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. Okay. So that's sometimes when you look at how, you know, if you put RDF into HTML, for example, anybody who likes HTML will say, well, seriously, you're not fooling me here. Of course, sometimes when you merge two technologies, you get something new and amazing and different. And of course, this isn't just about merging XML and JSON or RDF or any of those other languages, but also if you merge, you know, programming language, do a programming language in XML, then you get XSLT, which really rocks, right? A Miss Piggy language, yeah? Yeah, you're with me? Yeah, right. Now, these chimera, you have to admit they are usually pretty ugly. The original chimera, which is this statue here, is a monster. It's made out of a lion, a goat. I love the way the goat's head is just stuck on the back of it like that, completely useless, and a snake in the tail. And because they are pretty useless monsters, really, then the term, of course, now also means that it's a foolish or impossible fantasy. The idea of bringing together two things into some kind of hideous, monstrous beast. The trouble with these merged formats, these chimera, is that when you dress one format up as another, the result seldom has the advantages of either. Usually has all the disadvantages of either. So to pick the worst of the offenders, then RDF XML is a horrible way of expressing RDF. Because URLs aren't native in XML, so you can't express the essence of RDF easily. And it's also a horrible pattern for XML, because its variability in how it's structured makes it incredibly difficult to process with XML tools. So you have no benefits out of it, out of this chimera. So what I wanted to talk about here is to address the question of, are chimera the only way, are these hybrid technologies the only way in which we can get these four technologies to work together in a nice way? So I think that the answer is no. I think that we can get these technologies to work together in a different way. So this is the A team, yeah? each one of the individuals in the A team had a different quality, right? But together, as a team, they could work really well and achieve something amazing. So I think that we should view these four technologies that we're thinking about here, the HTML, JSON, XML, and RDF, as being like the members of the A team. And I'm not going to say which one is which, except, obviously, Murdoch is RDF, right? So, what does that mean? It means that you need to recognize and appreciate the strengths of each one of those technologies individually. Recognize and appreciate their strengths and their weaknesses, understand what they're good and bad at. Not try to make one do what another one can do better already. And it also means that we need to understand their similarities. Okay? So what enabled the A team to work together effectively was that they had a common language, they could speak to each other, and they also had a common goal. So they were all striving towards the same thing. Okay. So this is where I bring in the work that I do on legislation.gov.uk. My project that I've been working on for the last 3 years or so now is legislation.gov.uk, which brings UK legislation onto the web. And the public site for legislation.gov.uk is built on a fairly pure XML stack. We've got an XML database, SmartLogic, on the back end. We have some middleware using pipelines, lots of XSLT, Orbium pipelines. And then we produce out of it HTML or XHTML. And the slide here shows that underneath every single page on legislation.gov.uk, then there's some XML that anybody can get hold of and reuse as they wish, which is pretty cool. Now, what we're moving on to now with the legislation site is to have an editorial system that enables experts, people who know legislation, to help the in-government team get the legislation that's presented on the site up to date. Because legislation new legislation is always being made that affects old legislation, and you really need to be able to see the legislation brought together in order to get an accurate idea about what the current state of the law is. But the in-government team that has been doing that is massively out of date and massively overworked. They can put in about 10,000 effects to legislation a year, and the government makes 15,000 effects on legislation each year. So they just fall behind and behind and behind. What we're doing now is, like I say, is working on this editorial system which enables people who are experts in law to contribute back into the set of data that we have to bring it up to date. And in trying to support that, then we have new requirements. As I said, one piece of legislation affects another piece of legislation. What you end up with is a graph as relationships between these items of legislation. And we have lots of data about individual parts of the legislation, like, for example, what their extent is, which is, does it cover England, or England and Wales, Scotland, where does it cover, and when does it come in force? So we've got lots of data and lots of relationships, and that means that the best technology for putting that together, well, maybe not the best, but the one that we've chosen is RDF. The other new requirement that we have on this site is that they're going to be contributing to this data using a nice, interactive, web-based environment. So obviously, then that means using JavaScript in the browser, and it means passing small messages that are application-specific, and that means using JSON. So in doing this work, what I've been trying to do is pick the technology that is best at doing the thing that it is that I'm trying to do. XML is best for representing these nice structured documents. RDF is best for representing graph relationships and giving us data about them. And JSON is best for doing that communication. And obviously, HTML is best for presenting it on the web. We don't need to have Chimera. We don't need to have these crossover technologies in order to make this work. What we need to have is JSON that is good at being JSON. And we need to have RDF that is good at being RDF. And we need to have XML that is good at being XML, good for what it does best. So how do you get them to work together in that case? What enables these separate technologies to work together easily in the system that we're producing at the moment is what the web is really all about, which is URLs. So in the legislation that we have, then you can address to any level within the XML document, to parts, to sections, subsections. And every single one of those structures within the XML is named with a URL, every single important one. And those URLs enable us to have handoff between the various technologies. We use the same URLs in the XML to refer to structures in the XML, use those same URLs in the RDF in order to make statements about those sections, and use the same URLs in the JSON in order to refer back to this is the XML that you need to get, or this is the HTML that you need to get. So the URLs provide this glue, a common reference point and a common language between the four technologies that enables them to work together effectively. So that means that the URLs give us, enable each one of the technologies to be used for their strengths, that they provide a common language that enables them to be to work together. So this is what I was calling consonants in my title slide. It's not about them merging into each other, but about working together well. Now, URLs are just one example of common languages that we have, common micro-languages that we have, that we can use between these core technologies. Where we run into problems is where the formats of these common languages aren't actually common. So we have issues around URLs in that URLs as defined by HTML in HTML5 are different from IRIs as defined and used in XML and RDF. And where those differences, they're just these like little tweaky things that are different about them that means that you can't just easily hand off between them. And that was one of the things that came out of some of the work on RDFA. That RDFA will use IRIs because it is an RDF kind of technology, but it also has to use URLs because it's an HTML-y kind of technology, and because they don't mean the same thing, then we get into problems. We also have a few little issues around data types. So data types in HTML are different from data types. The data types that are used in HTML are different from those that are used in XML schema, which are therefore different from those that are used in XML and RDF, in particular around the date-time data types that have been newly introduced. There's a weak one in HTML, which we don't have in XML schema. And again, that is just this kind of doesn't quite gel, doesn't quite let us work together effectively. Another place like that is link relations, where we have a set of link relations that are used within Atom and within the RDFA for RDFA 1.0 and RDFA for XHTML 1.1. But those link relations, as maintained by IANA, are different from the set of link relations that are maintained and used for HTML5. So again, we can't use the same terms to mean the same things in these different languages because the micro-languages, the ones that provide the weak glue between the languages, are just a little bit off. So these mismatches in the small parts, in the little things, are what cause friction when you're trying to make the languages work together in the way I described. And the most gnarly problems that we found in the microdata and RDFA work that we did were really caused by those small, gnarly problems. On the other hand, no team is perfect. If you look at, if you watch the A team, then constantly they are battling with each other, and they don't always communicate most effectively, but they nevertheless manage to achieve their task, okay? So we can't expect everything to work exactly as we'd like, but we can try and address some of these problems. So either I've taught really fast or we did start very early. So I just have some closing thoughts. Looking through the slide, looking through the talks that are coming up during the next 2 days, it's obvious that a strong theme in this conference is reflecting on what the role is of XML on the web. As I said earlier, XML really had this quite overachieving youth. It was a bit like a child prodigy that gets pushed into all sorts of areas and being told it could do everything. And then it comes out of university and it has to find the thing that it's actually going to work for the rest of its life on. Okay. And the realization that you can't go through your entire life doing everything is maybe a little bit painful. And we're right to reflect on where XML sits within the web and reflect on where we are and what we want to become. In that reflection, I would encourage us to recognize that the web is a very, very variable place. And it thrives because of its diverse ecosystem. It hosts 800-pound gorillas, and it hosts tiny mice with long, 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 long tails. And this is the environment in which we operate, and XML has a place within that environment. The web is a complex and a dynamic and a beautiful place, and there's plenty of room on it. Also, I would reflect that there is a lot of the web that is beneath the crust that you see. So we see on the web pretty HTML and interactive applications and all of that. But inside, what backs up all of that beauty is some solid core technologies. In the same way as in the earth, if you took the core out of the earth, it would all crumble into nothing. We need to have that core. So I would also assess XML's role on the web, not as XML on the browser necessarily, but as XML in the web, as it's within the core of the web. So the other theme that I noticed looking through the talks for this conference was the relationship between XML and various other technologies, between XML and JSON, and XML and HTML, obviously, as we'll see in the next sessions. And also looking at how we might use XML technologies with non-XML formats, how XML might change in the future to make it more like other things. What we should be asking when we assess those, I think, is, are these chimera, are these monsters, or are they beautiful new things that are they Miss Piggies, right? Or are they pigs in lipstick? Is it really going to help to make this merge. Do changes make XML better at what it does, or do they just try and make XML not so bad at doing something that something else already does a million times better? Okay. Where does XML fit as its role, as its unique role within the A team, right? The other question is, as we look at these, how do any of these changes or any of these technologies help XML to work better with the other technologies, work better in concert with them? How does it help it communicate with other technologies, okay, rather than becoming something else? So the core message there is that XML won't improve and get better by trying to be something other than what it is, but by working better with the other technologies, by doing its own job really, really well, and by communicating well with the other technologies that it needs to talk to. And that's it. Thank you. I'm very fast.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for your wonderful presentation. And we have a lot of time for questions, so if you have some question, just raise your hand, and my helpers are here. We'll just distribute mic to you, so question can be heard by everyone and also can be recorded on the live stream.
All right, Jenny. So how do you propose that we store the data? Because obviously you can interchange between RDF, XML, JSON, and I wouldn't probably store it as JSON. So do you store it as RDF and export, or do you store it as XML and export to RDF?
Which data are you talking about?
Well,
are you talking about with the legislation?
Yeah, for example, yeah, or in general.
Okay, so what we're doing there, and this is part of what I was trying to get at about using the technology in the way that makes sense for it. What we're doing there is we store the XML in an XML database and we query it using XQuery because those are the good technologies for working with XML. And we store the RDF in a triple store and we query it using Sparkle because those are the good technologies for working with RDF. And then we have to obviously bring those together in some way, and at some point, what we currently do is that obviously when you query a Sparkle, then you get XML out of it. So that then feeds in so that we can do transformations and bring the technologies together in that way. But rather than so the alternative, which is what I'm arguing against, is to have the RDF data represented as RDF XML in a XML database and try querying it like that. What I'm saying is that that's not a good way of proceeding.
No, I totally agree. So, you know, my view is that XML can be the sort of denominator for all the other technologies then. So you store your data as XML and then you just export to whatever. That's how it might work.
Yeah, and if you're... For us, then it made sense to use XML technologies all the way through because we started off with the XML data because it was nice structured documents. It made sense to use XML as our stack of technologies. But there are lots of other places where people may want to just use a normal programming language to pull those information together. And it's not necessarily XML that needs to be the core denominator there. You could get the Sparkle results, for example, if you're using a triple store, you could get those out as JSON and use it in native programming structures like that. Okay? So I don't think it necessarily follows that XML needs to be the core language for getting the interoperability between them.
Hi, Jenny. The point at which I thought your talk got it was brilliant. The point at which it was really interesting for me was where you touched on the problem of different identifier schemes and the incompatibilities between them. Where do you think this problem might get addressed? Because it's been a problem that's been around for a very long time, and there doesn't seem to be much convergence on a solution.
In any particular area? So there was I talked about URIs, link relations, and one other thing, which I can't remember.
I think the problem really is around conceptual homogeneity. So the idea of, for instance, namespace dereferencing is something that's not been fully put to bed, and so you still get people coming up with the idea of using pearls and namespace clashes, even though that's the point of having namespaces in the first place, is not to have those clashes. So the idea, it feels to me like there's a need for a combined approach from perhaps W3C and IETF towards when certain identifier schemes are appropriate. Because it seems like the problem is that the decision's left to the application developers rather than being given any direction and advice.
Okay. You find good points. Yeah, so there's obviously a role for a high-level technical leadership in trying to provide an overview about how the technologies fit together, and in liaison with the IETF to do that. And I think that is really what the role of the tag is and should be. And I would hope that we could do that better within the tag.
So you talk a lot about communication between communities, and where ambassadors like you who are at XML conferences, more semantic web-related venues, trying to bring the message to the various communities. I'm not so much wondering about the technical leadership in discussing details, but I'm wondering about whether the communities themselves, in your view, are already ready for, let's say, the A-team conference. So a conference where the people who actually want to develop applications, so the grassroots people, or also the business people, would meet and say, okay, this is how it should be done together. For example, last week there was a Samtec Biz conference in Berlin, which is the semantic web business conference, and they don't talk a lot about XML, and there are things like that the other way around. So are the communities now ready, are already ready for this, and should we start something like the A-team conference?
Like a web conference, maybe. I mean, I think that there are venues which do bring together people who are working in those different communities. So, like the web conference and like TPAC if you're in W3C. That doesn't, but I think that there hasn't been the focus on thinking of us as the A-team rather than thinking of us as being people who fight, basically, which is a real shame, and that's part of why I wanted to talk about it. Oh, sorry, John.
Yes, you're representing graph relationships with RDF, and I'm curious about what you're doing with them, because I'm seeing that in a lot of places people are using RDF without inferencing, and they're doing different kinds of things with it.
Yeah, we're not doing any inferencing at all. It's purely about how easy it is to pull out the to query that kind of structure, to pull out the information that you need in a very, very flexible way, so that because you're not constrained to a specific object hierarchy, you can pull in the bits of information that you need when you need them. I didn't really explain that very well, but trust me, it really, it's similar to the difference between trying to process XML documents using string manipulation and trying to process them using XPath or XQuery and trying to get into them using that. When you have graph data structures, being able to query it using something like SPARQL gives us that flexibility into the full data structure to pull out what we need.
Hi, Jenny. Great talk, thank you. Okay, so you talked briefly about how legislation.gov.uk, this isn't so much a technical question, so how the project is maybe, it's not keeping up with the requirements that are burdened upon it in terms of how much legislation amendments, etc. are actually published and how much the development team can actually get out there. So you mentioned that the professionals and experienced professionals within the legal domain or whatever are going to be asked to you know, contribute or whatever. My question is that it really needs to be about consistency and about keeping a consistent approach to ensuring that the level of and the quality of information there is an actual representation of what the legislation stipulates. What I find that with my own experiences is that when you're trying to remove the possibility of human interpretation messing and mucking up what is actually legislation, because in trivial information, maybe people's places, events, whatever else RDF's good for representing, if it's stuff like legislation, it's hard to ensure that when you get professionals, they might be professionals, but if I ask somebody from that side of the room and somebody from that side of the room to maybe annotate what they think should be in the legislation, you're going to get two, maybe not completely different answers, but different answers. What measures are put in place to try and mitigate against that kind of stuff happening?
Okay, so there's a kind of fundamental I think, misunderstanding about what we're doing. So there are two ways in which you can think about data in legislation. One is the way that you were just talking about it there, which is what is the legislation talking about, actually pulling out the information from the legislation that's embedded in the words itself, right? Which is a very interesting kind of thing to do, and is a topic of a lot of academic study and some progress, but not very much. What I've been talking about really, it's really about meta information, metadata about the legislation. So what legislation affects another piece of legislation? What does it insert? For example, what does it change? And like I say, the meta information about the extent and about the commencement information about a particular piece, which is not open to legal interpretation, right? That's just facts about the way that the legislation fits together. So what we're addressing currently within the system is purely that second set of metadata about the legislation itself. We have some hopes of looking at some of the more legal informatics things about pulling out the data from the what that's actually embedded within it. But where we'll probably focus our attention, if we get around to doing it at all, is on in places where we've got very highly structured data within the legislation itself. So typically then there will be a schedule in certain types of legislation that will basically be a table of, you know, lists of government departments and other bodies, which we can very easily pull out that kind of data. And it's not, again, it's not really open to legal interpretation. So we wouldn't be trying to represent any of the legal information or doing any kind of inferencing over whether something is legal or not, right? We're not touching that at the moment. Okay.
So you spoke about 4 technologies, but my feeling is that we have basically only 2 data models, because JSON, XML, and HTML, it seems to me, is essentially one data model, but RDF not. So my questions are, first, would you agree? And second, is this maybe significant for focusing on the real problems, which might be the harmony between 2 really different data models?
So I don't think that I do agree. Mostly, I mean, although you can say that HTML, XML, and JSON are all tree models rather than a graph model, they do have very different kinds of data that they will hold. So, you know, XML will hold mixed content really well, for example, whereas JSON really doesn't. Yeah. So, although it's true that they have those similarities, I think that the differences are such that we still have those disconnects and those differences between them. But, you know, that's my opinion.
So, my experience has been that every time a new format or markup language comes along, it has a moment where it thinks it's going to replace everything and it's the best thing ever. And I mean, there are more than the ones that you quoted. I mean, SVG is another one that in the beginning thought it was going to be the new document format of the web, and it, of course, because it was much better, it could do much more than HTML and so on. And then in that moment of over whatever, they tend to reinvent the wheel or invent things that are already solutions for, and do it badly in some way or another. And then when they finally realize their true position in the world, then you've got a bit of a mess that you have to clear up. And I think that that's some of what you were saying. However, what did strike me was when you were mentioning the problems that you had with sticking those things together. In each one, you mentioned HTML5 as being a problem. And I wonder if you think that HTML5 is also suffering from this overconfidence, and that it will take a while for them before they realize actually that they have to fit in with the rest of the world.
Well, you may say that, Stephen, but I couldn't possibly comment. Yeah, I'm not going to comment. We'll have the panel later.
We'll still have plenty of time for questions. So,
or coffee.
It will not be healthy to have 1 hour long coffee break. There is a question over there. Yeah.
Since we have so much time, I might as well respond to Stephen.
Hey!
I would say that HTML was first, and lack of study of that language has led to the inconsistencies in say, XML schema, and also the various other things. Like, because HTML was sort of full, like, oh, we're going to abandon that, so we don't need to study all its details, and we're just going to reinvent the wheel with XML and going to introduce these new languages, and it's going to be slightly saner, and URLs are going to work slightly saner, and they don't have the legacy encoding of the percent encoded bit of form submission. So we can all drop all that and do the new thing. And then it turned out that actually the thing you abandoned didn't quite die and lived on, and well, and then you're going to have to deal with the implications now.
But it's about the mismatch in the evolution as that happens, and the mismatches that we get. So I don't think there's actually anything wrong with with the way, having, say, for example, to pick on the link relations thing, I don't think there's anything wrong with having link relations being managed in a wiki in a way that is open for other people to use. The problem is the mismatch then that occurs with other people not adapting to also use that. And the problem arises when we don't, as a community, as the A-team community, as a whole, come together to discuss about what the best way forward is, right? Where it's basically one technology going on its own and everybody else trying to just keep up. That makes things harder just to get along, I think is the issue. It's not that the evolutionary path is wrong. It's that the way that it's done can sometimes lead to conflict. A bit.
So we still have some time for questions, even if you would like to have coffee. Okay. It's my turn. Morning.
Cheers. Great talk. I'd like to hear a little bit on the other side of the equation. Have you changed the way how laws are made, or are you still sort of catching up? Has there been any impact with these systems with regards to how, are they thinking new ways of using the system?
So, sorry, I missed the any impact on how what is made?
So I would imagine there is no system before. This is sort of a greenfield site for them.
For legislation
yes.
You're talking about? No, the legislation.gov.uk came out of two existing sites. So we inherited a database, which was the statute law database, which had been going on for some time, which was the revised legislation. And then there was the OPSI site, which contained as enacted legislation. And we brought those together into the one site. And it has actually quite radically changed the way that the way that people see that legislation in a number of ways. So, for example, and it's quite gradual, but it's happening in a very real way. So, for example, people who in the UK are drafting laws now are looking at the way that the law will actually be presented on the site and participating in usability studies about how they can draft law better so that it's more readable and more understandable by people. So yes, having that kind of impact going back into the drafting process like that. And we're also seeing, because of some of the new functionality that we're putting into the site as part of support for editorial, for supporting changes being made by other people, we're also seeing the ability for people who are drafting legislation to create new versions of old legislation that show what the law will look like when the legislation they are drafting comes into force. Okay? So they provide these proposed versions of legislation. And for one particular document, Financial Services and Markets Act, which we helped support a proposed version for, they reckon that being able to do that through the support that we provided them has saved them a year in their drafting, because it means that they don't have to create a whole new bill. They can show the effects that an amending document is going to provide. So I think that, yeah, the way that we are opening up legislation, the way that we're presenting it, is actually going to have a good feedback effect on the way that legislation is drafted and the way that it gets developed over time. It's pretty cool.
Okay, so more questions? If no, I thank you again.
Okay, thank you.